It's a Saturday. You're washing the car, working the sponge along the bottom of the rear wheel arch, and your thumb catches on something. A little blister in the paint. Not much bigger than a coin. You press it the way anybody presses it, just to see, and it caves in. Doesn't chip, doesn't crack. It gives soft, like the top of a stale cracker, and a little shower of orange dust falls out onto your shoe. That's the moment. That right there. Because up until you pressed it, you had a car with a small cosmetic flaw. Now you've got a hole and a decision to make. Here's what almost nobody understands about that little bubble. What you can see on the outside is the smallest part of it. That coin-sized blister is the tip of it. On the back of that panel, where you can't see without pulling a liner out, that rust is very often the size of a saucer. Rust always looks worse from behind. Always. I've cut rotten metal out of more fenders and rockers and floor pans than I could put a number on, and the pattern doesn't change from one car to the next. What shows up on the paint is the little bit that finally broke through. The real damage was happening in the dark for a couple of years, before you ever felt it under your thumb. Now you take that car to a body shop, and for a rusted panel like that, you're looking at somewhere between $400 and $2,000, depending on the panel and where you live. I'll show you the exact reason it costs that much later on, and it's not the reason you'd guess. Because the actual materials to fix that hole yourself, properly, in your own driveway, run about $25 to $40 and an afternoon of your time. But, and this is the whole thing, so stay with me, there is a right way to do this, and a very wrong way. The wrong way is the way most people do it. They sand the bubble, they smear some filler over the top, they hit it with a rattle can, and it looks great for about 4 months. Then it comes back, bigger, angrier, bleeding orange down the paint. They didn't fix anything. They painted over a fire. By the time we're done here, you'll know exactly which of the 3 kinds of rust you're actually dealing with, because that one thing changes everything. You'll know how to properly repair a rust hole without a welder and without a single specialist tool. And you'll know the one line you must never cross, the point where doing it yourself stops being thrifty and turns genuinely dangerous. And stay for the part near the end where I tell you why your car rusted in the first place, because when you understand that, you're going to be a little annoyed, and you should be. Let me show you what's actually going on inside that metal. Rust is not a stain. That's the first thing to get out of your head. A stain sits on top of a surface. Rust eats the surface, becomes the surface, and then keeps going. Here's the reaction, and forget the chemistry class words. I'll give you the version that actually matters. Steel is mostly iron. And iron does not want to be iron. We spend an enormous amount of energy at a mill pulling iron out of iron ore, which is where it was perfectly content sitting for a few million years, and the second we're done, it starts trying to go back. All it needs is oxygen and water. Give it those 2 things. The iron combines with the oxygen, and it turns into iron oxide. That's the orange stuff. That's rust. Now here's the part that makes rust so nasty, and it's the single most important idea in this whole video. When iron turns to rust, it gets bigger. The rust takes up more room than the metal it came from, several times more room. So it swells, it puffs up, and because it's swelling, it pushes and it cracks itself apart, and it flakes off in layers. The old-timers called it pancake rust, and that's exactly what it looks like, flaky layers stacked up like a bad pancake. Why does that matter? Because every time a flake lifts and falls away, It exposes fresh, clean metal underneath to the air and the water, which rusts, which swells, which flakes, which exposes more metal. You see what's happening here. Rust is a fire that makes its own fuel. Left alone, it does not stop until there's no metal left to burn. That's why you can have a fender that looks fine, and then seemingly all at once, it's full of holes. It wasn't all at once. It was years of quiet swelling and flaking behind the paint, and the paint was just the last thin skin holding the shape. And that swelling is also exactly why you cannot just paint over it. If you trap active rust under a coat of paint or a smear of filler, you've done nothing to stop the reaction. There's still oxygen and moisture down in the pits, and the rust keeps swelling, now underneath your nice new paint. And in a few months, it lifts your repair right off the car. You didn't stop the fire. You built it a roof. There's one more thing worth knowing, because it's genuinely useful. Not all oxide is bad. There's a black form of iron oxide, and unlike the orange stuff, the black oxide is roughly the same size as the metal, so it doesn't swell and flake. It actually forms a tight skin that protects what's underneath. It's the bluing on a gun barrel. It's why a cast iron pan gets seasoned black and then quits rusting. So when somebody tells you all rust is the enemy, that's not quite true. The orange, flaky, swelling kind is the enemy, and that's the kind eating your wheel arch. So the whole game, the entire job, no matter which method you use, comes down to one idea. Get to clean metal, stop the reaction, seal the oxygen and the water out, and don't trap any of the bad stuff inside. Everything I'm about to show you is just a different way of doing exactly that. Before you touch a single tool, you have to know which of the 3 stages of rust you've got, because the answer decides the whole job. Stage 1 is surface rust. This is orange discoloration, or little freckles or paint that's dulled and stained, but the metal underneath is still solid. Push on it, it's firm. This is the easy one. And honestly, if you catch it here, you've already won. Stage 2 is scale rust. Now the rust has started pitting down into the metal. The surface is rough, crusty, flaking, and if you run a screwdriver across it, it's got texture, little craters. The metal's still there, but it's compromised and thinning. More work, still very doable. Stage 3 is penetrating rust. This is a hole, or metal so far gone it crumbles when you press it. This is the caved-in blister from the start of the video. The metal in that spot is simply gone. This is the one people think requires a welder, and I'm going to show you it doesn't, with one enormous exception I'll get to. Let's do surface rust first, because it's the most common and the most ignored. You've got a stained spot, maybe a chip that's gone orange. All you're doing here is getting back to clean metal and sealing it before it can spread. Chuck a wire wheel into a drill, or grab a piece of 80 grit sandpaper and work that spot until every trace of orange is gone, and you're looking at bright, shiny, bare steel. Not most of it, all of it. Rust left behind is rust that starts again. Then feather the edges of the surrounding paint so it's not a sharp step. Now you seal that bare metal, and you've got 2 roads. If it's genuinely clean, bright metal, the best thing you can put on it is an epoxy primer. That's a 2-part primer that grips bare steel and locks the air and water out. If the spot is pitted and you can't quite get every speck out of the little craters, this is where a rust converter earns its place. And I want to be straight with you about what a converter is, because it's sold with a lot of magic, and it is not magic. A rust converter is a liquid, usually built on one of two acids. One kind uses phosphoric acid, and it turns the orange oxide into a hard, grayish-black compound called iron phosphate. The other kind uses tannic acid, same stuff that makes strong tea bitter. It comes from tree bark, and it turns the rust into a stable blue-black compound. A lot of the good ones use both. Either way, here's what it actually does. It takes the rust that's there and chemically changes it into something inert and stable that isn't going to keep swelling, and it leaves you a surface you can paint. What it does not do is remove rust, and it does not work miracles on thick, crusty scale, and it's close to useless on metal that's soaked in road salt. On a light, pitted surface, brushed on clean, it's a genuinely useful tool. On a flaking, scaly mess, it'll skin over the top and leave the active rust working away underneath. And now, you're right back to painting over a fire. So use it for what it's good for. Light surface rust and pitting. Let it cure a full day. Then prime over it. After primer, you're into normal paint. Primer, then your color coat. Then clear if the panel's got clear on it. Sanding lightly between coats. Done right. A surface rust repair like that is essentially permanent, and it costs you a couple of dollars and an hour. That's the whole thing. Most rust that turns into a $2,000 disaster was a 15-minute job at this stage that somebody drove past for 3 years. Now the big one, the hole. Penetrating rust on a body panel, a fender, a quarter panel, a door skin, the bottom of a wheel arch. No welder. Here's how it's actually done. First, and there's no skipping this, you cut the rod out. All of it. Remember, it's worse behind the panel than in front, so that little hole has a halo of thin, dying, half-rusted metal around it that looks okay, but isn't. You take a cut-off tool, or tin snips, or a grinder, and you cut back until you are surrounded on all sides by solid, bright, healthy metal with no pitting. This feels brutal. You're making the hole bigger on purpose. But if you leave any of that dying metal in place, the repair fails from the edges out. Then you clean and sand a good couple of inches of solid metal all the way around the hole, because whatever you patch with needs clean steel to grab onto. Now you bridge the hole, and you've got a few good ways to do it. The cheapest and most common is fiberglass. You use fiberglass cloth and resin, or a long strand fiberglass filler, which is body filler with strands of glass mixed into it for strength. You cut the cloth a little bigger than the hole, wet it out with the resin, and lay it over the opening, often from behind if you can reach, so the patch gets drawn in flush. The glass and resin cure into a hard, rigid bridge. And here's the quiet advantage nobody mentions. Fiberglass doesn't rust. Ever. You've replaced a patch of steel that wanted to corrode with a patch of glass and plastic that physically can't. Long strand fiberglass filler is nearly as strong as the sheet metal around it. For a wheel arch or a lower fender done properly, that's a repair that'll hold for years. The second way, if you want metal behind it, is a patch panel bonded in with adhesive. And this is the part that surprises people, so listen close. There's a product called panel bonding adhesive. It's a 2-part structural epoxy. You cut a piece of sheet metal to cover the hole, scuff both surfaces down to bright metal, lay a bead of the adhesive along the seam, and clamp or rivet the patch in place. When it cures, that bond has a shear strength somewhere in the range of 3,000 to 4,000 pounds per square inch. That is as strong as, and in some ways stronger than, a spot weld. Because a weld is a series of little dots, and the adhesive grips the entire seam at once. This is not a backyard shortcut somebody made up on the internet. This is what real collision shops do every single day. Modern cars roll off the assembly line with panels glued on from the factory. A good body man will bond a whole quarter panel onto your car, and you would never know it wasn't welded. Once the hole is bridged, whichever way you chose, you shape it. You skim body filler over the patch to bring it flush and smooth, filling the low spots, feathering it out into the good paint. Filler over a proper patch on clean metal is exactly what filler is for. That is a completely different thing from smearing filler straight over live rust, which is the sin we started with. You knock the filler down with 80 grit, then finer, working up through the grits. Hit any last pinholes with a thin glazing putty, and sand it smooth to the touch. Then primer, color, clear, same as before. And seal the back of the panel too, if you can reach it, a coat of paint or cavity wax on the inside, so the whole repair is sealed on both faces. Materials for that entire whole repair: the fiberglass or the patch and the adhesive, the filler, the primer, a bit of paint, $25 to $40, an afternoon, maybe 2 if you're fussy about the paint match, and you should be. Now, I told you there was a line you don't cross, and here it is. And I mean this one seriously. Everything I just walked you through is for cosmetic, non-structural panels, fenders, door skins, quarter panels, the visible sheet metal that hangs on the outside of the car. It is not ever for the parts that hold the car together and hold you together in a crash. That means the frame rails, the subframe, the rocker panels, the sills that run under the doors, the suspension mounting points, the floor around your seat mounts, and your seat belt anchors. Those are structural. They carry load, and in a wreck, they manage the energy that would otherwise be going straight through you. You do not glue those. You do not fiberglass those. The adhesive makers themselves, the people who sell you the panel bonding epoxy, flatly state that it is not for structural members, and that if you are not sure whether a part is structural, you weld it. Full stop. Rust in those areas is a cut it out and weld in new steel job, done by somebody who knows what they're doing, or it's the end of that car. It'll also fail a safety inspection, exactly as it should. If the rust is in the bones of the car, close the hood and get a professional opinion. Being handy is a wonderful thing. Being handy in a way that lets a seat tear loose in a crash is not thrift. That's a tragedy waiting on a bad day. Quick word on staying in one piece while you do the safe version. That dust you kick up grinding rust and sanding filler is nasty stuff. Wear a proper respirator, not a paper dust mask, and eye protection every single time. On an older car, the paint itself can contain lead, and you do not want that in your lungs. The converters are acids, so wear gloves. Keep them off your skin and out of your eyes, and work with the doors open. Resin fumes want ventilation. And if any of this is happening under the car, it's up on jack stands, never on the jack alone. And you know where your brake and fuel lines run before you cut or drill anything. None of that is hard. It's just the difference between a good Saturday and a bad one. Let me give you 2 more things that separate a repair that lasts from one that comes right back. The first is the moisture path. Rust needs water, and on a car, water almost always gets in from a place you're not looking at. A wheel arch rusts because the plastic liner traps mud and salt against the back of it and holds it wet for weeks at a time. A door rusts from the bottom because the little drain holes at the bottom edge clogged up with dirt, and the rainwater that runs down inside the door glass had nowhere to go. A rocker rusts from the inside out. So when you fix the visible rust, and you don't fix why it got wet in the first place, you're just working on a clock. Clear the door drains. Pull the packed mud out of the arches. That 5 minutes of cleaning does more for the life of your repair than the fanciest paint job ever will. The second is the inside of the panel. I mentioned sealing the back, and it deserves its own moment. The reason your car rusted from the inside out is that the factory sealed the outside beautifully. Paint, clear coat, the works, and the inside of those panels and cavities got a whole lot less. Water gets into the cavity, sits there, and eats the metal from the side you can't see and can't reach with a brush. That's why professionals shoot a waxy coating up inside doors and rockers and rails, a thick, creeping wax that crawls into the seams and won't let water sit on bare metal. If you've got a cavity you can get a wand into, a can of cavity wax is some of the cheapest insurance there is. It's the step the factory got stingy with, which is the perfect way to walk into the part of this I promised you. So let's talk about why that car rusted in the first place, because it isn't bad luck. And it isn't that rust is some unsolvable force of nature. We solved it. That's the part that should get under your skin. By the early 1990s, the car industry had rust genuinely beaten. They started coating the steel in zinc, galvanizing it. And zinc is clever, because it sacrifices itself to protect the steel underneath. It corrodes first, so the steel doesn't. They dipped whole car bodies in it. They added an electrocoat primer that reached down into every seam and cavity wax in the hollows. And they were so confident it worked that they handed out warranties against rust perforation, the metal actually rotting through for 6 years, 10 years, some as long as 12. A car from that era, looked after even a little, simply did not rot the way cars did in the 70s. Problem solved. Genuinely, properly, engineered out of existence. So why is your car rusting? Because that protection costs money, per car, on every single car built. And there is always someone in a meeting looking to save a few cents a unit. I'll give you one clean example, because it's been documented. One well-known German maker, back around 2007, quietly thinned the zinc coating on a popular model. Dropped it from a 5 to 10 micron layer down to a 3 to 8 micron layer. At the thin end, that's close to a 40% reduction in the very thing that stops the car rotting. Nobody announced it. Owners just started noticing rust turning up years earlier than it used to. Years later, they quietly put it back. That's the whole story of modern rust in a single move. Not a force of nature, a line item. And here's the money part, the part that answers why that shop wants $2,000. There is no money in a car that doesn't rust. There's no money in teaching you that a 15-minute job with a wire wheel and $1 of primer stops the whole thing before it ever starts. The money is in the panel that finally rots through and lands you at the body shop counter, where the bill runs $400 to $2,000 a panel, and 70 to 80% of that bill is labor. A full restoration, where the rot's gone deep into an old car, runs $10,000 to $30,000 and up. That's the machine. A little corner cut at the factory to save a few dollars, quietly. And the cost of that corner lands on you years down the road, multiplied 1,000 times over, at a shop. And there's a whole side racket that grew up right next to it. For decades, dealers sold you extra rust proofing on a brand new car. The undercoating add-on. A few $100s. You can never have too much protection. Most of the time on a modern galvanized car. It did next to nothing the factory hadn't already done. And now and then, it did real harm, trapping moisture against the metal instead of keeping it out. It sold because fear sells, and because nobody standing in that showroom made a nickel by telling you your car was already protected. The villain here is never one person. It's a flow of money, and the money flows toward the expensive fix and away from the cheap prevention. Every time, like water running downhill. And that's the thing I keep coming back to. Standing over a fender with a wire wheel in my hand. A rusty panel isn't a mystery. It isn't beyond you. It's oxygen and water and time doing a simple thing to simple metal, and the fix is a handful of cheap materials and a couple of hours of paying attention. For most of the history of the car, ordinary people knew this. They fixed their own arches in their own driveways because they had to, and because nobody had yet convinced them that they couldn't. What's quietly been taken isn't the ability. The ability is right there. You just watched how simple it is. What's been taken is the belief that it's yours to do. Every year the car gets a little more sealed up, a little more leave it to us, a little more designed to send you somewhere with a card machine. And rust is one of the few places where you can just take that back. There's a real, plain satisfaction in running your hand over a spot you fixed yourself that you know is solid, that isn't going to spread, that didn't cost you a week's pay. That satisfaction is the whole point. Not the $40 you saved, the knowing. So here's what to actually do in order the next time you find that blister. First, figure out which stage you're at. Press it and look. Solid metal with orange on top is surface rust. Rough, pitted, crusty is scale. A hole, or metal that crumbles, is penetrating. That one answer decides everything that follows. For surface rust, grind, or sand to bright bare metal, all of it. Then seal it with epoxy primer, or treat light pitting with a converter and let it cure a full day. Then primer, paint, and clear. $1 or $2 of materials, an hour of your time, and it's essentially done for good. For a hole in a cosmetic panel, cut out every last bit of dying metal until you're surrounded by solid steel. Bridge the gap with fiberglass or with a patch bonded in with structural adhesive. Skim it with filler over that clean patch. Sand up through the grits, then primer, paint, and clear, and seal the back of the panel too. $25 to $40 an afternoon. And the line one more time because it matters more than any of it. Frame, subframe, rockers, suspension mounts, seat belt and seat areas. Anything structural, you do not glue and you do not fiberglass. That's weld and new steel by a professional, or it's the end of the car. When in doubt, treat it as structural and weld it. Then do the 2 5-minute things that make the whole repair last. Clear the drain holes and dig the packed mud out of the arches so the metal can dry out, and shoot cavity wax up into the hollows the factory went cheap on. Now picture where that puts you. It's a couple of winters from now. You're washing the car and your thumb runs over that arch, and it's solid because you caught the next little freckle at 15 minutes instead of paying $2,000 for it at 3 years. You look at rust differently now. It's not a death sentence for the car, and it's not a mystery. It's a slow, simple thing, and you know how to stop it. That's the whole gift of understanding how it works. Now I want to hear from you, and I read every one of these. The comments are genuinely the reason I keep doing this. Tell me where you are and what your winters are like, because salt on the roads changes this entire conversation. Tell me the worst rust you've ever beaten, or the car you lost to it before you knew any of this, and especially Tell me what you were taught. The trick some old mechanic showed you in a driveway 40 years ago that I didn't cover here. Somebody reading this knows something I don't, and the comments are where it gets passed down to the next person. If this was useful, subscribe, because the next one belongs right beside it. We're going to take on one of the biggest quiet lies printed in a modern owner's manual: the lifetime transmission fluid. The fluid that's supposedly filled for life and never needs changing. I'm going to show you exactly whose life they mean, why that little phrase might be the two most expensive words in your entire glove box, and the simple thing that quietly decides whether your transmission sees 200,000 miles or dies at 90. You are not going to look at that dipstick the same way again. Until then, go find your rust while it's still just a freckle. Your future self and your wallet will thank you for it.